Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Fabric Spotlight, a series of talks with enterprise CXOs, infrastructure executives, cloud infrastructure investors, and entrepreneurs. Today, I'm delighted to host Joe Ferlisi, the CIO and CISO of Rockefeller Capital Management. Joe is responsible for innovation, architecture, and data security across the firm. Welcome, Joe. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be with you, Prabakar.
So before we get rolling with the various topics that we would like to get your thoughts on, perhaps you can give us a little bit of background, personal background, how you got your personal journey, the experiences that shaped your career, including at Merrill Lynch and Morgan Stanley. That would be good for the audience to hear from you.
Sure. So it's been a long journey. Spent most of my adult career in Wall Street firms, Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, as you mentioned, in various roles. I actually started off my career in the infrastructure space, building data centers, network infrastructure, voice over IP, you name it, across the technology gamut. I've had a hand in it in one way, shape, or form. But the last decade or so of my career has been spent really on business application capability and kind of how because I've always seen there was a big gap between infrastructure and applications. They sort of worked in parallel universes. And I thought, bridging the gap across the stack from an infrastructure and application perspective, I think was imperative. I think we're seeing that in the world that exists today with software-defined networks and other things like that. So so I spent a good portion of my time in infrastructure. I ran the banking services at Merrill Lynch. I ran all the client channels, mobile platforms. Been very fortunate to spend a lot of time with a lot of smart people and work in various aspects of the business. And how I ended up here, my current boss, Greg Fleming, who was the co-president at Merrill Lynch, and was also the president at Morgan Merrill Lynch Morgan Stanley Wealth Management and Asset Management, started this venture here, and along with Chris Randazzo and a few people that we work very close with over the years, we're now on this new venture, which is almost like a startup in a 100-plus-year-old brand in Rockefeller.
Very interesting. So. You talked about bridging the gap between applications and infrastructure. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit on advancing the business agenda where you are now. What are the key initiatives and innovations, and how you are planning to use cloud infrastructure? Those kinds of things would be good to hear.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's less about initiatives and more about enablers, right? What are the things that any company needs year in and year out in order to address varying degrees of needs that they have from a business perspective? So when I think about, business, I think about technology, you think about what are the key enablers: speed to market, time to value, security, making sure that things are scalable. I always remember being in the infrastructure space. Every time we wanted to scale something, it was, how quickly can we get equipment, and how quickly can we get data center space, and how quickly can we get all this stuff? And the nimbleness just takes it takes a long time, heavy investment in capital, and then because sometimes you want to test and learn, you want to grow, you don't know that you want to go all in on something. I think the cloud enablement has given us the ability to test and learn quickly, to fail quickly when things don't work, and to scale when they do work in a meaningful way. And there is no separating out applications and infrastructure, in my view. There never was in my mind, because applications have demands on your infrastructure that you have to really understand before you design it. And I think what we tried to do here at Rockefeller is build a very nimble, modern, and contemporary infrastructure in order to deal with things that we may not even know, like COVID, for example. We didn't know that it was going to hit us, when we started this cloud journey. But had we not taken the journey that we did, our ability to adapt and quickly mobilize the organization to deal with the situation of remote work and access from anywhere and all the other things that came with it, would have probably been very, very difficult for us to adapt to. So a simple example of where, our philosophy around speed to market, security, scalability as one of our core tenets it plays a role every day in what we do.
Yeah, so it sounds like one of the main features for cloud adoption, drivers for cloud adoption for you were the agility and scalability.
And security.
And security. So I'll come to the security part of it.
Yep.
In terms of agility and scalability and those kinds of things, do you see it's going to be just dominated by like adopting one public cloud, or do you see multi-cloud, hybrid cloud? How do you see that going forward?
I think that every company is going to struggle with what's right for them, because in a company like Bank of America, where I came from, the sheer size and scale of the different types of businesses that are being supported, a multi-cloud hybrid cloud strategy might be best for them, versus us. We're like I said, we're a smaller, more nimble company. Us saying that we're going to be a hybrid cloud, that's out of the question. We don't have any infrastructure on-prem. We're purely a cloud-based company, which we're fortunate enough to do. We don't have any technology debt. We don't have data centers. We don't have co-location. When people hear it, they're like, "Really, you've achieved it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, we have." So the hybrid approach is kind of not really that relevant. And the multi-cloud approach is, it sounds very novel on a piece of paper, but to say that we're going to run, let's just say a Microsoft Azure platform and a AWS platform, quote unquote, in parallel, to have multi-cloud strategy, it's not very practical for a lot of folks to do as well. So do I think there'll be a lot of different models? 100%. There's no one answer for every client. It's going to be based on the client demand. It's going to be based on the situation. I think hybrid clouds are somewhat required because many companies, especially the larger ones, they have massive investment in infrastructure and networks and servers and all that stuff that you're not going to just flip a dime on. So you have to figure out how you're going to introduce. That's where I was at when I was at Bank of America. Just how can we introduce cloud capabilities? But they'll be on that journey, in my opinion, for decades.
That's a good point that you make, is that it's not one size fits all, right? Sometimes people are glibly throwing, "Oh, cloud is going to eat everything." It doesn't quite. It's not one size fits all. So that's good to hear. So you mentioned security, and you are a CISO also. So I would like to kind of drill in a little bit on that. So it seems like there is still, at least from what I can see, there's some nervousness around putting all the data out there on the cloud. But you have achieved it. So how do you reassure yourselves and perhaps your customers, and what initiatives do you take from a cybersecurity perspective? What's your defense?
Yeah, I mean, just like there's no one size fits all for different businesses, there's no one size fits all model for data management either, right? So when folks say there's still hesitation, I think there always is hesitation where there's doubt, right? So it's sometimes just the ability or inability to quantify what the risks are. To some extent, I feel that we're safer in the cloud. If you want to, if you want to completely flip the script a little bit, because they're using much more modern technology in certain instances. There's a lot more of other large scale providers. Like when I say, if the government can be comfortable with storing data, and not just the smaller parts of the government, but the NSA and many others that are leveraging these cloud services. To me, we benefit from that because Microsoft, as an example of them being our provider, they are investing billions of dollars in security and infrastructure, and I'm the beneficiary of that. I'd never be able to do that on my own. So when I view it as a opportunity, and an advantage, it's a huge advantage. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I didn't even have that option available to me.
Yeah.
Right. So to me, it's one of those things that's an enabler. And we don't take it any lightly. We don't think that we're somehow more protected because we're in the cloud, but it actually just forces you to think about your risk profile and what are the things you have to be worried about. What are the things that you have to do that you didn't think about before? But it all starts with identity and managing, security access to the devices. Then once you get there, entitlements, what are people allowed to do? So whether you're hosting your data in the cloud or on-prem, your mindset, you might have to think about different use cases, but your mindset shouldn't change. It's what are your threat vectors? What are the things you have to do to assess those, and what do you have to do to have a good hygiene environment, right? So whether you're housing it internally or externally that's just another place it's someone else's data center. It doesn't change the problem. It just changes the tools that you have to solve the problem.
Right. I mean, like there are shared responsibility, right? They are responsible for infrastructure security, but you still have to secure the application and the data.
Exactly. You're never obfuscated responsibility. We as Rockefeller, just like any other company out there, if you're putting your data there, you're doing it, you own the responsibility. It doesn't matter whether you house it on Azure or AWS or your own private cloud or your own data center. At the end of the day, you need to make sure that you understand the risks and you have a program in place to manage not only the infrastructure aspects of it, but usually it's the people that forget to do basic things like disable accounts. And when you look at some of the data breaches out there, it's not massive gaps in infrastructure. It's some very simple logical things that did not get done. So the hygiene is important regardless of where you put your data.
Yeah, these days there are things like CSPM that are targeted explicitly at the hygiene part of it. But there is another dimension to that, particularly newer industry, is compliance, right? PII and GDPR, and you have to kind of pay attention to a lot of extra regulations, I presume, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, no doubt. I mean, there's the regulations that we have responsibility for. Obviously, the regulators that we operate under their jurisdiction, but there's also the commitment we have to secure our clients' data and such. So, and again, I see that as a benefit because we were just going through this today, right? We moved all of our file infrastructure to SharePoint and Microsoft 365 and lots of those tools. So when you do that, I have a compliance dashboard that I never saw before in 25 plus years that I've been doing this, right, without buying a whole bunch of third-party products to bolt in to go out and scan my environment. And so now as part of this service, I've got some built in, and I could build my own audit profile. So today we looked at specifically a FINRA cybersecurity assessment, right? So FINRA has a set of policies they publish out there, and then they ask you to do an assessment. Well, it's built into the product, right? So if you look at the policies and things that they look at, they'll look at, well, are you using, complex passwords? Are you doing, whatever those policy things are? The system, because it's all in an integrated capability, it gives you a lot of telemetry and information out of it for you to act on that you wouldn't have had if you were storing it on your own file shares, as an example. So to me, it's not just about where you house it, it's all the services and capabilities around it that'll enable you to act quickly. Email, a legal hold is another example. I know it's sort of tangential, and if I am going off course, I apologize, but legal hold is critical in our business. If we get, if a client raises an issue and we have to put a legal hold, you have to freeze the information and documents associated with that. Well, I can go in to a tool today, open up a case, freeze those documents. They can't be deleted, they can't be archived, they can't be touched. So it's very powerful, and it's constantly growing. The capabilities that existed a year ago are different than exist now. And I get releases every quarter, and I'm not doing anything other than being a customer.
Yeah, that's the collateral benefit of innovation that comes from the providers. That's very interesting. No, I think it's actually quite relevant because if you think about it, since the infrastructure elements are being taken over by the cloud, now that what we have to pay attention to kind of rises up. Instead of infrastructure security, we pay attention to application security. Instead of storage, we think about data. So I think all of this is quite relevant. So there is an orthogonal thing here. You mentioned multi-cloud hybrid. There's an orthogonal dimension, which is central versus distributed. Now there is a lot of talk about, oh, you can't just be in the centralized cloud data centers. There need to be edge locations, and telcos are partnering with public clouds to provide edge cloud. As a forward-looking technology executive, innovation, what are your thoughts on that? How that plays, how 5G plays, and all of those kinds of things.
I mean, I've been saying this for years, that I think it's the next big generational transformation that people that are in technology are going to go through, because speeds and feeds have fundamentally changed. I was joking that the CPU and memory I have on my iPhone is probably 5x what my first PC was, or a PC that I bought a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
The point is that capabilities are growing, and the computing capability and the capacity that exists on the infrastructure and the edge is huge, right? It all has to be based on use cases, right? That makes sense, but your use cases and the fundamental 3-tier architecture of a web browser, a web front end, a middle tier app server, and a database, I think are gone, right? I think they'll exist in different shapes and forms, because all three of those things may be in different places, right? And the subscription-based economy, I think, is going to continue to grow, which means it's not all going to be in the same place. It could be in different places. So you got a highly distributed security realm that you have to operate in. It's not always going to be ubiquitous, but it has to operate as if it's ubiquitous, right? So I think standards are going to play a bigger role going forward. I think that interoperability, if you look at what just Microsoft is doing, interoperating with Mac OS and other things, if you would have, again, thought about that 5 years ago, they were very proprietary, very narrow. Yeah. I think people, the industry is pushing everyone to interoperate, because that's what clients demand. That's what we demand. We have to have things interoperate. They can't be proprietary. I do think that's an area, Prabakar, that's going to be very, very opportunity driven in terms of hybrid capability, because I can define for Rockefeller where we're going to live and what we're going to do and how we're going to work. But I've got, dozens and dozens of third-party partners that we do, we trading partners, people that do portfolio management for us, our broker dealer. They all have their own solutions that they've come up with. We can't say, well, I'd like you to follow my architecture. We need to be able to adapt to third-party partners. So that's typically, by definition, going to be a hybrid cloud environment, right? They could be hosting themselves in AWS in their own data center. So I think that we're already in that world, and it's just going to continue to drive that way. The question now is how much of it is going to be truly cloud? Because in theory, if I have a third-party data center that I'm connecting with via API gateways, to me, that's a cloud, right? I'm going over the internet, I'm accessing those APIs. It just might be somebody's physical data center as opposed to a third party. But to me, it's architecturally, it's the same.
Right. It's like an API SaaS kind of a thing. Right?
That's right.
So you mentioned this is related to edge, but related to something else as well. You mentioned, for instance, remote work, distributed work. What's your thoughts on kind of like these distributed workforce, the quality of service that they need? Are you able to solve it entirely, or are you looking for solutions that can provide better quality of service with security?
I think that's the thing that people are always going to chase is bandwidth, right? You want as much secure bandwidth as you possibly can, so you can have our video conference here. I mean, where else would the world be without video conferencing in the last 12 to 15 months that we've been in the situation? So I don't even think remote work is a word anymore. I think it's just work, right? Wherever you are, you want the same experience, whether you're in your bedroom at home or at a coffee shop or in the office. So the whole concept of a zero trust architecture to me is critically important. We have to think about, it's not always going to be our network. It's not always going to be our PC, but we want the experience for our workers and our people, our advisors, to be just as productive as if they're in the office, right? So it forces you to completely think about things in a different way. So to answer your question, I don't think we can solve the issue of bandwidth and security and quality of service, but I think those that are out there trying to do it, it's a big win for them if they can. Challenging to do, but at the end of the day, if you just need an internet connection to get to be productive at work, now the question is, how do I bring those services to that internet connection so that we could do it securely? Because the whole notion of you're on our network and you're secure, I think, is a thing of the past, right? I mean,
Right.
Even today, when you have to remote in through a Citrix terminal or do some sort of VPN, it's awkward. It's just not natural. I think becoming a more native experience is what employees and in general people are going to want.
Yeah, when people were in branches, they brought software, SD-WANs, and then it evolved into SASEs and stuff like that. In this distributed environment, now you have to think about branch of one, and the branch of one is also moving around. So
exactly, it needs to follow the person as opposed to you got to be in a physical location. Right? We did the same thing. We thought we were modern. We had SD-WAN infrastructure, and we still think it's a very modern infrastructure, but you almost feel like, oh my God, that's old news. If I were doing it all over again today,
right.
I would maybe be doing something a little bit differently. So the world's changing so fast. The technology that's evolving in this space is exciting, to see where it goes. It's also cautioning because there's so many out there that are all trying to chase the same thing. You got to make sure that you're making your bets right on the right partners.
Well, that's where innovation comes in, right? As long as you have deep innovation, then you can kind of carve out space for yourself, and that's what we believe we do with our co-created companies. So, slightly shifting gears, you said that you are completely cloud-based, and I presume you have your own applications. So how do you deal with this modern cloud-native app management? Are you using Kubernetes? How are you managing such environments?
Yeah, we have a little bit of everything, right? So we have a lot of cloud native PaaS services that kind of managed on our behalf, if you will, by those providers. We have a modern DevOps environment. We use Kubernetes as one of our container strategies. So even when we have to bring in non-native cloud-based applications, we throw them into a container so they operate in an environment that looks and feels like another cloud native. So we have that hybrid. We can't control all the third-party applications that are out there, but when we do an evaluation of software and capabilities, one of the first things we look for is it cloud native? Is a subscription-based service? And there's more and more. We partner with some vendor partners, like in the data space, for example. We're partnering with a certain vendor that is partnering with Microsoft, and we're working with them because another one of our third parties uses the same software. So we're connecting them through the cloud in a way that we wouldn't have been able to do before, right? So we're pushing any deployment that we do to be as native as possible. But the reality is we have a lot of legacy applications. We have legacy partners that don't. So Kubernetes is definitely one of the platforms that we use for orchestration, but we don't have a lot, which we're lucky. We have a lot of it is cloud native, which
Oh, that's good. That's good.
As services give us, like our entire client portal, for example, everything's built on the Azure API gateways that are there. Our code is deployed in the native environment on the web access platform. So we don't have a huge portfolio of applications that are not native.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
We're lucky.
Yeah, that's great. That's tremendous. Again, something different. Finance is kind of like one segment where people have looked at use of enterprise blockchain, not the Bitcoin stuff, but the enterprise blockchain functionality. Are you looking at that at all? What are you beginning to explore something in that regard?
No, I did a lot of it at Bank of America before I joined Rockefeller. I was on the board of R3 for a little while.
There you go.
And I did a ton of work in blockchain. And the biggest challenge you have with blockchain is finding the killer use cases, right?
Yeah.
So there's the technology and the capability is there, and there's some use cases that are very robust, but it requires people to change the way they think about delivering a business process, right? So it's not just about technology; it's about
Right.
how are you changing the supply chain and the value chain of a given business process, and to orchestrate that amongst many companies, it's very, very, very difficult to do. So you have to have an industry that is adopting it. You have to have partners that are adopting it. So I think the technology is very, very intriguing. The use cases, and I still think there's some skepticism about this distributed ledger, everything being out there without really having control of a full transaction and other things. So I think the technology is very innovative, but I don't know that the environment is ramped up, if you will, or mature enough. Like, it's hard enough to orchestrate even in your own company. Could you imagine orchestrating across different companies, personnel changes, people that are advocating in one organization, they leave to go to another company, then the advocation goes down. So it's very, very spotty in terms of adoption and consistency. Because in order for it to work, you really need an exchange that everyone subscribes to and goes all in order to prove it out. So at Rockefeller, we really don't have any use cases that we're pursuing in that space, right? We're still early on we have a very clear growth agenda and the target market that we're after, and the target products that we serve there's no real use cases that we can think of right now that we would be, putting our toe in the water on.
You interact with a lot of technology executives in that area, New York, New Jersey, the financial area. So what are the key infrastructure or the kind of like the gap that you were talking about? What areas are the groups discussing? Can you share some insights from such discussions for our audience?
Yeah, I think, the common theme that comes up is the one we brought up a little earlier that talks about, the remote workplace. I think, the words keep coming up where people are struggling with, how do I easily get people connected to the ecosystem? Because the entire ecosystem was built on the premise that you're on our network, you're on the corporate network, right? When I think the world is changing, right? It's slowly changing, but it's changing nonetheless. So I think that the challenge that I continue to see and people talk about, and one of the things that attracted me to join Rockefeller is that we wouldn't have any of this, which is there's a lot of legacy infrastructure that's out there in the industry everywhere, right? Legacy phone systems, legacy network services, all this kind of stuff. At some point, that's going to start aging off, and people have to start transforming where they're going and taking the new demands and the new requirements into play of like you said, work anywhere, video anywhere, security. So I think that the problem has to change and the mindset has to change from I need to secure people wherever they are, not just our network, because it might not always be your network, right? At least all the way through to the edge. So, and I think things like VPNs and others, I think they already are getting somewhat antiquated and such. So I think new ways of thinking about how do you deliver very robust user experiences in infrastructure that you don't own in a secure way, I think is going to drive the next decade. I think the other thing is everyone talks about data is king and edge computing and all that good stuff, but I don't think they know what it means. Because if you ask most people, they'll say, I got my databases in a data center, I have them surrounded by firewalls, I have some level of protection in front of it. So the architectures haven't evolved too much. The technology has evolved, but the implementation and getting people to think differently is probably a slow uptake. And the slower the uptake in the new technology, the longer it's going to take to do, which means that, you know, legacy technology debt is going to increase over years, and people are going to have to really take. They're worried about standing still and just keeping things status quo because everything's changing so quickly. How do you keep up with it? And are people going to make the capital investments to refresh a network? Maybe that world of just constantly refreshing what you have at some point is going to come down to a point of diminishing return, right? Because no one likes to put that much capital on their balance sheets. They'd rather, scale up, scale down, and set themselves up. So I think the short answer to your question is keeping up with what's the next generation of capability while maintaining the existing plan, I think, is a struggle for a lot of CIOs and CTOs in the industry.
Okay, great. Thanks for that insight. So we kind of like come to the kind of wrapping up part of the discussion here. To wrap up, what we would like to hear from you is, I'm sure you have had a lot of interactions with entrepreneurs and various early stage companies. What's kind of like your advice on how they should approach working with people in your industry, in your position? Any tips on what to do and what not to do?
I'll start with what not to do. Don't underestimate the problems that need to be solved in financial services. They all seem straightforward, but as you brought up early on, the sensitivity around information management and the regulators that, the number of regulators that regulate our industry is very high, and the requirements that we have are very high. So don't downplay the working with I'm talking about my business segment specifically, the business segment that I'm in. So don't underestimate and try not to be everything to everybody all at the same time. When someone comes and pitches something that just looks like it solves the entire gamut of capabilities, that might be a good aspirational pitch, but you all know you have to put one foot in front of the other. So, very tight use cases that you can explore with partners that don't demand a ton of their time, but you can prove something out. That always is a better approach than, a very broad set of aspirational goals, if you will. So I've the best POCs that I've done, and some of them that have allowed us to cross paths over the time, was just solving one narrow issue, but seeing where it could go, right? Innovation sometimes is seeing where the puck is going, not necessarily where it is right now, but also being realistic that you can't solve this in one one big project. It usually is going to be a series of investments over time. But as an entrepreneur, having people that understand the vertical business problems, not the technical issues. Obviously, you got to have smart people and good engineers to build code and write code. But if you have subject matter experts in verticals that really understand the business problem and can work with those people, I think that's a huge advantage.
Thank you very much for sharing the time and sharing these insights with us. Looking forward to more discussions with you in the future.
Same here. Thanks again, Prabakar. I appreciate it.
Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for another episode of Fabric Spotlight. Thank you very much. Bye.